Vikings were pretty good at combing hair and skiing. They could also kill you pretty good too. The Vikings earned their notorious reputation by launching brutal raids across Europe and parts of Russia between the 8th and 11th centuries. During what's become known as the Viking Age, these Norsemen would storm villages and loot anything of value. Then they'd burn down what they didn't take, and if you were lucky, maybe they'd enslave you instead of, removing you from your head. These guys were so effective at their jobs that their legacy still haunts the modern imagination, and Hollywood loves a good Viking saga. So, let's check out what made the Vikings such good fighters, and why everyone from England to Byzantium wet themselves whenever they were unfortunate enough to see their longships coming toward their village. First up, these weren't just some random dude with weapons. Viking men were practically born with swords in their hands. From a young age, boys were taught the art of combat. This wasn't just about preparing for a career in pillaging, though that was a big part of it. Viking society was rough, and being able to defend oneself was a necessity. It's reported that Viking youth spent their time hunting, playing sports, and of course, raiding. Normal kid stuff. According to historical sources, every male Viking was expected to complete weapons training. This wasn't optional. It was a matter of survival. And they didn't just learn to swing a sword. They trained in a unique form of martial arts called Gleima. Gleima included everything from throws and kicks to locks and weapon techniques. There were even two types of Gleima, one for combat and one for sport. Combat Gleima was the deadly stuff, meant for warriors, while sport Gleima was practiced by everyone, including women and children, for fun and fitness. But make no mistake, even the sport version could give you a nasty bruise. This rigorous training ensured that when a Viking warrior stepped onto the battlefield, he wasn't just relying on brute strength. He had skills, honed from years of practice, that made them dangerous in a way that few of their enemies could match. All the training in the world doesn't do much if you're stuck fighting with a wooden stick. But the Vikings were some of the best blacksmiths around. A Viking was never caught without his weapon close at hand, ready to use at a moment's notice. There's even a gnomic poem from a Viking age, the Halvamol, that advised men to never take a step without their weapons of war. Because, you never know when you might need to plant a spear in someone's chest. But here's the catch, weapons, they're not cheap. The richest Viking could afford the full arsenal, a sword, a sax, that is a short sword, an axe, spear, bow and arrow, shield, helmet, and maybe even chainmail. Poor Vikings had to make do with more basic gear, a lot of times just an axe or a spear and shield. Now, if you were really down on your luck, your armor might be nothing more than reindeer hide. You heard me. Reindeer hide is armor. Now, that doesn't sound particularly battle-ready. Well, it's better than nothing. For those who couldn't afford the best gear, there was always the option of working under a wealthier Viking. These wealthy warriors were expected to provide for their men, meaning you might get to wield a finely crafted sword if you played your cards right. The Vikings also had one pretty serious weapon, the Ulfbert sword. Historians and blacksmiths are still trying to figure out how exactly the Vikings managed to make the thing. One guy named Richard Fur tried to recreate one of these bad boys using the same medieval techniques, and said it was the most complicated thing he'd ever made. The Ulfbert sword was strong, it was light, and it was sharp. It was so well made that the weapon had a supernatural status back in the day. It helps to win battles when you have an acceptance of death like the Vikings did. They just didn't really fear it, and they had a way of making it work to their advantage. Dying in combat was one of the most honorable ways to go. It guaranteed a one-way ticket to a glorious afterlife. Vikings believed that if they bit the bullet bravely in battle, they'd be whisked off to Valhalla, the hall of the god Odin. They could also be taken to Falkvang, where the goddess Freya hung out. Both of these afterlives were basically the ultimate warrior's paradise, places where they'd spend eternity feasting and fighting and carrying on and getting ready for the final battle of Ragnarok. For a Viking, charging into battle was a win-win. If they lived, they got to loot and party. If they died, they got to do all that in the afterlife. This fearlessness made the Vikings super dangerous opponents. While their enemies might be more concerned with staying alive, the Vikings were all about making their deaths as glorious as possible. And it's kind of hard to fight someone who's got nothing to lose. One of the biggest advantages was a Viking's ability to strike quickly and without warning. Their longships, those iconic dragon-headed vessels, were key to this strategy. These ships were light and fast and could navigate both the open sea and narrow rivers, allowing the Vikings to hit coastal and inland targets alike. A typical Viking raid would go something like this. Step 1. Sail up to an unsuspecting village. Step 2. Rush ashore. Step 3. Start pillaging before the locals knew what hit them. By the time anyone could put up any resistance, the Vikings would be back on their ships, sailing off with their loot and a couple of unfortunate captives. A lot of times they were gone before anyone could retaliate, leaving only burning buildings and terror in their wake. I mean, their attacks were multi-level. They knew how to make their enemies' eyes widen in terror. One way they did that was by decking out their ships with scary figureheads and carving all kinds of creepy designs into their weapons and shield. Seeing a Viking longship on the horizon was like seeing a sea monster rocking up to your soon-to-be very unpeaceful harbor. The Vikings were pretty strategic when it came to choosing their targets. They weren't interested in fighting fair. They wanted easy wins, and they were smart enough to go after the soft spots. Monasteries, for example, were a favorite target. These religious centers were often filled with valuable silver and gold, but were poorly defended compared to towns and cities. Vikings knew they could hit these places hard, get what they came for, and be gone before anyone could put up much of a fight. They also targeted coastal areas and towns along major rivers for similar reasons. These places were accessible by ship, making it easy to raid and escape quickly. The Vikings were also intelligence gatherers. They had networks of spies who would keep an eye on potential targets and look for the best opportunities to strike. They would monitor the movements of local forces, assess the wealth of a region, and wait for a perfect moment to attack. Now, if a place was in the middle of a political crisis or an internal conflict, that was even better. No one's going to be focused on defending against an external raid when they're busy fighting each other. This careful planning allowed the Vikings to move from small, disorganized raids to launching large-scale invasions that saw them conquer and colonize part of England, Ireland, France, and even Russia. By the end of the Viking Age, these Norse warriors had gone from being feared raiders to rulers of entire territories. When facing prepared enemies, the Vikings relied heavily on their high morale and strong bonds within their ranks. Organized into tight-knit boat crews, these warriors shared everything from rowing to raiding, which forged a deep sense of camaraderie. This closeness meant that each Viking was motivated by the need to protect his comrades and uphold the group's honor. High morale and a strong sense of duty often gave them an edge in battles where other forces might have faltered. Social pressure also played a significant role in Viking combat. Cowardice in battle was seen as a fate worse than death. A Viking who fled from a fight would bring shame upon himself and his family, so they fought with the determination of men who knew that their reputation and honor were always on the line. The legendary berserkers also added an additional sense of terror when any unfortunate opponent met the Viking forces. The berserkers of the Viking Age were savage, infamous warriors known for fighting in a trance-like state of fury. Their name probably originated from the word of bear shirt, the wolf and bear pelts they wore into battle instead of armor. This gave them an almost mythical appearance, as if they were transforming into the animals they wore. The origin of these fierce fighters might trace back to ancient Germanic tribes, as suggested by scenes like those on Trajan's column in Rome, which shows tribal warriors in bear and wolf hoods. The earliest descriptions of berserkers come from Old Norse texts like the Raffinsmal, which is a 9th century skaldic poem. The poem depicts berserkers as fearsome warriors, who howl like wolves and wave around iron spears before they charge into battle. They basically activated something called berserker gang, or berserker mode, where they seem to change from form and warp into wild animals. According to the Ynglinga, was written by the Icelandic historian Snorri Sturluson, they fought without armor and had the tendency to bite their shields. They were also apparently immune to fire and iron. Those are all good cheat codes to have when you rampage and end a battle. Berserkers were elite soldiers, the champions of some Norse sagas like Snorri's Ynglinga. But as Scandinavia started converting to Christianity, the image of the berserkers started to shift. They started getting associated with criminal behavior. They were portrayed as thugs and murderers who kill without discrimination, and that wasn't a good look. There are some theories about what really caused the berserker rage. Some scholars think it was self-induced hysteria, or even maybe epilepsy. Maybe it was drugs like magic mushrooms, or the plant henbane. In 1977, archaeologists found henbane seeds at a Viking grave in Denmark. Coincidence? Or not? By the early 11th century, berserkers had fallen out of favor. Jarl Erik Haknarsson of Norway outlawed them in 1015, and by the 12th organized berserker war bands had disappeared.